What's going on, everybody? Cryo here, and I know I'm late to the party, but y'all asked for it, so here it is, my Brewmaster guide for patch 8.3. Let's get it. Starting off with the talents. First, we have Eye of the Tiger, a passive ability that makes your Tiger Palm leave a dot on the target for 8 seconds. Now, while applied, this dot, aside from dealing ticket damage, will also heal the monk. This talent will shine and outperform its counterparts on strictly single target encounters. The Eye of the Tiger dot can only be applied to one target at a time, so if you are using it and you're in an AoE situation, be sure to spend all Tiger Palms on the priority target. Chi Wave is an instant cast ability that will bounce between enemies and allies, dealing damage and healing respectively. Although this ability has a much shorter cooldown than Chi Burst, it caps out at 4 targets. Speaking of Chi Burst, this is the go-to talent for almost every scenario. It will vastly outperform the other options as soon as there are multiple targets. As it stands, there is no hard cap on the amount of enemies it will strike, and if you aim it correctly, it will heal your allies that it passes through. A lot of people forget that while channeling Chi Burst, you still dodge attacks, so don't shy away from this talent due to the cast time. If you are not playing with it now, I recommend getting used to it sooner rather than later. Celerity is a solid choice in terms of more frequent mobility, however with how 8.3 plays out, you are much better off choosing one of the other two options. Chi Torpedo. This used to be my go-to talent until the introduction of Corruption. The distance this talent grants allows you to avoid certain mechanics in the blink of an eye. For example, avoiding Urgroth's Spirit Breaker ability used to be a breeze. The added speed boost also aided with kiting mobs around for a much longer time. Tiger's Lust. This talent brings a tremendous amount of utility to your group and is very hard to pass up. The ability to break yourself or friends out of any roots or snares while also increasing movement speed for a few seconds can quite literally save lives. Especially as a tank, you are subjected to grasping tendrils almost on cooldown with the amount of damage that you take, so being able to clear the snare and avoid mechanics while positioning mobs is a big deal. On the level 45 row, we have Light Brewing, an extraordinarily strong talent in terms of survival that is less punishing than Black Ox Brew. This means that if you are new to the class or struggling with brew management, this is a solid choice. During most Mythic Plus scenarios, Light Brewing will provide you with more available purifies. Spitfire. Don't even look at this talent. But really, the damage output of both Breath of Fire and Tiger Palm is so low to begin with that this talent just cannot compete with Black Ox Brew in terms of damage output. It does okay when paired with the War Mode talent Incendiary Breath, but since we can't use them in instances, it doesn't really matter. Black Ox Brew. In terms of brew generation, the difference between this and Light Brewing is extremely small. This talent, if played perfectly, will net you more DPS, but even the slightest mistakes can drop it below Light Brewing. Level 60 brings us more utility and most likely the row you will swap out the most. Tiger Tail Sweep. Maybe if it half the cooldown of Leg Sweep or stunned for longer than 3 seconds, more people would take it, but it's not worth giving up Statue or Ring of Peace in its current state. Summon Black Ox Statue, an extremely useful tool that will pulse threat to all enemies within 20 yards. This talent will greatly improve your threat generation on larger packs or during skittish affix weeks of Mythic Plus. Taunting the statue will also force enemies near the statue to fixate on you. Last but not least, Ring of Peace. The amount of things you can do with this talent is endless. A very strong, almost mandatory tool to take in Mythic Plus if you're a Brewmaster. Being able to counter the Necrotic and Sanguine affixes while providing an additional kiting and repositioning tool, which does not share diminishing returns with other effects, is huge. Level 75 brings in some defensive choices. Up first, Bob and Weave. Not gonna lie, it took me a long time to figure out how in the world an extra 3 seconds of stagger can outperform an active defensive cooldown and a self-heal. If you solely focus on tooltips, no one in their right mind would choose this over the other two. But people much smarter than myself have broke it down. In layman's terms, the duration increase of stagger means that the incoming spike of damage is smoothed out over a longer period of time. This means that we are taking lower damage per second from stagger. Having a longer stagger time also means that our pool of stagger damage will be larger due to the increased time it takes for the damage to leave the pool naturally, making Purifying Brew casts essentially remove a much larger amount. Shout out to the people over at Peak of Serenity. They provide a lot of information and genuinely keep it up to date, so if you guys have any other questions, be sure to check out their Discord or their website, which I will link down below. Moving on, Healing Elixir. Since Brewmasters lack self-healing, this talent is very appealing. If you're doing solo content, this can be great to have, but it will not see much play in raids or Mythic Pluses. Dampen Harm, a much more straightforward talent. Simply take this if you know a certain mechanic will need additional mitigation. Examples could be Searing Breath from Rathian or Eye of N'Zoth from Il'gynoth. If you are new to the class or just undergeared, you can definitely make good use of this talent. Special Delivery. The slow it provides can be useful in kiting scenarios, and this ability allows you to continue minimal DPS while out of melee range of mobs, but there are better options. Rushing Jade Wind. With the way things are now, this provides the highest sustained DPS in single target and AoE. Giving up this talent also gives up a huge chunk of our threat generation. Invoke N'Zow, the Black Ox. The only scenario where this will outperform Rushing Jade Wind is on a very short single target burst encounter. Finally, our level 100 row, High Tolerance. This talent is amazing. Not only does it provide a passive increase in effective health, it increases both damage done and resource generation when you need it most due to the haste granted. It also provides comparable but lower DPS on a single target encounter, but better damage in multi-target situations. All this plus a passive survival benefit, this talent should be your default choice for raids and dungeons. Guard. Essentially, this talent can be looked at as another preventative cooldown. It's best when used just before a massive hit occurs, so it can be tricky to use if you're unfamiliar with encounters. Blackout Combo, a great talent that raises the skill cap of the tanking playstyle. You mostly take this talent when survival is not a concern and you want to boost your personal DPS. For optimal usage, spend your empowerment on Tiger Palm every time except in AoE scenarios where the targets will live roughly 30 seconds. Then you will empower every cast of Breath of Fire. The defensive element comes from empowering Ironskin Brew. However, this effect, while powerful, can kill you if mismanaged. So only use this empowerment cautiously and when planned. A stagger pause should always be followed by a cast of Purifying Brew after the 3-second window. Side note, if you are wanting to run this talent, be sure to pick up 3 pressure point Azerite traits to maximize your output. Here is an overall look of the generic Mythic Plus build I run for most weeks. When talking about Azerite traits, keep in mind that the strength of the Azerite trait is based on the source's item level. This scaling will typically make a higher item level piece of gear better, even if it has less than ideal traits. Of course, there are a few exceptions, but for Brewmasters, giving up the stamina and agility is most often not worth it due to our traits being remarkably close in values. The Tier 1 Outer Ring traits you want to be looking for are Training of N'Zow. This is our best offensive and defensive trait. This trait does and should be stacked 3 times. Heart of Darkness. If you have access to the raid, especially at the mythic level, I recommend grabbing at least 2 traits of this. Keep in mind, it is absolutely worthless if you are running under 25 corruption, so keep this in mind when upgrading your corruption resistance. Sometimes it's best to hold off if it will put you below the threshold. Elusive Footwork. The additional mastery stack effect only applies once, so going above 1 point in this trait only provides extra damage. It has nice synergy with Training of N'Zow, and is a solid choice if you do not have access to Heart of Darkness. Boiling Brew. Having 1 trait of this is almost mandatory in the Mythic Plus scene. It outperforms Elusive Footwork offensively only once you are pulling groups of 4 or more enemies. Keep in mind that multiple stacks of this trait does not increase the frequency at which health spheres spawn. Straight No Chaser. Solely a defensive trait, but definitely a solid choice. The additional armor should be up nearly 100% of the time. It can provide a burst of damage reduction when you need it, and smooths out mistakes if you are struggling with your brew management. It's a good trait, but not as valuable as the previous options. You may think you want Staggering Strikes, but it's severely undertuned. If you have access to any of the other mentioned traits, go for those first. For the Tier 2 General Ring traits, solid choices to seek out are On My Way. With how well Versatility is doing in 8.3, while stacking the correct corruptions can turn this into a very strong trait. Blood Siphon. A small boost to your mastery and leech. Not great, but not a waste. Crystalline Carapace. An effective defensive bonus that has a reliable uptime. Azerite Veins. Can definitely see some play in the Mythic Plus scenario. This is more beneficial to Brewmasters rather than other tanking specs due to our lack of self-healing and how our stagger works. We are almost always taking some sort of damage, so a constantly ticking hot with decent uptime is always welcome. Ablative Shielding. A reactive defensive cooldown that procs when you drop below 40%. This trait is an invaluable option for Brewmasters looking to maximize their survival while in the Mythic Plus scene. Your go-to Tier 3 traits are Gemhide. As a Brewmaster, you'll notice this trait has an extremely high uptime. This is your number one trait to go for in this row, but do not sacrifice the rest of the trait selections or equipment options just to obtain it. Impassive Visage. Stagger damage does trigger this trait, which makes it very consistent. The healing adds up quickly and is arguably more valuable than Gemhide in Mythic Pluses. An honorable mention goes to Vampiric Speed. As the tank, you will be harming every mob that your group encounters, therefore you will leave each pack with a decent enough heal and a minor speed boost. Now keep in mind, these choices are purely for a defensive setup. Self-reliance is a major part of being a decent tank for your Mythic Plus squad. Your typical Mythic Plus setup will look something like this. Conflict and Strife Major. This provides us with a tremendous amount of versatility and a minor boost to our DPS via the honor talent Hot Trub. Nullification Dynamo. An insanely strong mitigator for magic damage. Although timing it to maximize the amount it absorbs can be rough, you will often see this very high on the healing meters at the end of a dungeon. Aegis of the Deep provides us with another significant amount of versatility right when we need it most, and a passive healing effect. Strength of the Warden. Typically taken if you need a defensive option and the additional corruption resistance. This provides us with a very stacked defensive build. You may also see some monks dropping Nullification Dynamo or Strength of the Warden for Vision of Perfection. This is typically only seen at a very, very high level of keys, where more frequent use of Fortifying Brew may be needed. For rating, your Heart of Azeroth may look something like the Crucible of Flame Major. This provides us with the most DPS and should be used on cooldown. The Formless Void has nearly 100% uptime while paired with the Crucible of Flame. Nullification Dynamo and Conflict and Strife both make an appearance again, due to the amount of versatility CNS provides and the amount of magic damage needed to be mitigated throughout Nyalotha. Both are very strong essences. If you are trying to maximize your Twilight Devastation damage, you may opt into Anima of Life and Death Minor. The more HP you have, the more damage Twilight Devastation does. When talking about corruptions for Brewmasters, it boils down to two questions. Do you want to live forever, or do you want to attempt to do damage? For Mythic Plus, the general consensus is to live forever and survive large pulls for maximum efficiency. For this, I recommend stacking Versatiles. Versatile 3 is obviously the best option. However, if you are just starting out, have low corruption resistance, or just bad RNG, the other options are viable. If you're already rocking a plethora of Versatiles, obtaining one Surging Vitality can net you a huge amount of versatility. Unlike other tank specs, this has a significantly higher uptime for Brewmasters due to the fact that it can proc off of our stagger damage. If you do decide you want to attempt a DPS build, you will probably want to snag a Twilight Devastation or two. Since Brewmasters do not even look at haste as a secondary stat, and on top of that have one of the lower health pools, your Twilight Devastations will not proc as often or hit as hard as you'd expect. Of course, this is all based on RNG, but it's fairly unreliable. Infinite Stars is again a proc-based corruption, but it has the potential to ramp up on strictly single-target fights. Gushing Wounds is a bit more reliable, however deals significantly less damage than the other two options. Something to note, if you find yourself in the position of an Anzig Ra, auto-cleanse it. Brewmasters do not attack fast enough for this corruption to be worth it. But this weapon, especially at the Mythic level, will provide you with a significant amount of versatility. Other items you should aim to acquire: Lingering Psychic Shell. This trinket is extremely powerful and only has a 1-minute cooldown. Use it often. Bloodthirsty Urchin. You can easily farm this trinket from Lady Ashvane in the Eternal Palace. There are always groups forming up for at least the first 4 bosses on Mythic difficulty. This trinket may not feel like much, but it will smooth out your damage intake and provide a tremendous amount of healing overall. If you are an alchemist, the Peerless Alchemist Stone is an incredibly strong trinket for brewmasters. This trinket provides a massive chunk of versatility, especially when coupled with a few versatile corruptions. Now that you know what to wear, what does it take to play a brewmaster? To start, you cannot go wrong with the correct stats. As you've probably already guessed, brewmasters favor versatility. This is for both offensive and defensive. Following versatility, you can either go for mastery to be a bit more defensive or critical strike to be a bit more offensive. Of course, for DPS stat weights, you should always sim yourself. The higher up you go in terms of Mythic Plus difficulty, the more necessary it is to have the correct consumables. I recommend having a healthy supply of Abyssal Healing Potions at your disposal. For food, you can eat whichever stat you are trying to raise as long as it's not haste food. I personally prefer Biltong for that juicy versatility. As for flasks and potions, Greater Flask of the Currents and Potion of Unbridled Fury are your go-tos. Again, depending on your specific Mythic Plus progression, composition, and level of competitiveness, Lightfoot Potions, Drums, and Scrolls are all useful to have handy. Due to the current seasonal affects, invisibility pots are not required unless you are trying to engage early Awakened Moms with the final boss. Typically, you will not see this until outrageously high looking to time Mythic Pluses. As for your rotation, there isn't one. Brewmasters follow a priority system, much like all the other classes. This priority system will change based on your talent selection slightly, but for basics, you want to start an initial pull with Rushing Jadewind already active and a Keg Smashed followed by a Breath of Fire. Now to ensure maximum threat and damage was dealt, be sure to Keg Smash the centermost target of the mob. If you happen to cast Breath of Fire on a target that is not afflicted by Keg Smash, you miss out on 15 seconds of DPS and more importantly, 12 seconds of threat generation and damage mitigation. Blackout Strike should be used as close to on cooldown as possible. However, it is okay to delay the use of it for a second or two if you're aiming to dodge a specific mechanic. Tiger Palm is essentially your filler ability. Now this does reduce the cooldown of your brews, so do not forget to hit this ability, but prioritize Keg Smash and Blackout Strike first. By keeping your Keg Smash, Rushing Jadewind, and Blackout Strike on cooldown, while maximizing Breath of Fire damage, you should never have an issue with threat or brew management, which will make or break a brewmaster. Speaking of brew management, Ironskin brews should have 100% uptime when you are actively tanking. You should only be using charges to maintain the buff without wasting duration. And what I mean by that is Ironskin brew can stack to a duration of 21 seconds. For this reason, you should avoid using this ability if more than 14 seconds remain on your buff. It is highly encouraged to snag a weak aura that tracks this ability to make it much more manageable. One such weak aura can be found in my Discord, link down below. Now purifying brew, and using it correctly, is the main distinction between experienced brewmasters and those just starting out. Finding out when to purify will rely heavily on your playstyle and experience, and how competent your healers are. I personally purify a tad earlier than I probably should, but as long as you are not purifying and sacrificing Ironskin brew uptime, you are fine. It is best to purify after a significant hit to maximize its usage. If you're new to the class, just time your purifies after tank abilities, or when you're capped on brew charges. You are a brewmaster tank. You stagger hard-hitting abilities and have a very smooth and slow damage intake. You are the master of kiting out large packs for long periods of time. You have the easiest time with snapping due to transcendence placements, and you can pull off some incredible feats with Ring of Peace. Do not let anyone convince you that you are trash because you are not playing the meta tank. You can comfortably tank up to a plus 26 with ease as long as you are geared properly, understand your class, and have a competent group. There it is, folks, my 8.3 Brewmaster guide as promised. Again, I apologize for it being out so late. This was the first time ever attempting something like this, and I wasn't quite sure on how I wanted to go about it. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it and learned something that will make trying out a Brewmaster seem more appealing for you. If you guys did enjoy this, be sure to leave a big thumbs up and comment down below if you want to see more class or spec type guides in the future. Shadowlands is right around the corner and things are changing almost drastically for some of the tanks. If this is content people are looking for, I will gladly get them out at the beginning of an expansion or patch rather than the end of it. But that's it for me, folks. Again, thank you for watching. Get out there, tank some dungeons, and as always, stay frosty.